You can perfectly render every detail on a portrait and still make it look flat and boring. And here is why. Let me guess, you start a portrait, you carefully draw one eye, then the second one, then the nose, and at some point you realize it just doesn't look right, so you try to fix it by adjusting details, but it only gets worse. This is where most beginners get stuck, and the reason is simple: you are focusing on the wrong things. Here is the shift you need to make. Instead of painting face elements as if they were puzzle pieces, think of the face like one big structure consisting of shapes and tones that are in relationship with one another. A good portrait isn't a collection of parts. It's a system where everything depends on everything else. A lot of people think realism comes from details, so they spend hours rendering skin, eyes, textures, but the truth is, you can paint every eyelash perfectly and still have a bad portrait. Because realism doesn't come from detail. It comes from values, the relationship between shapes and forms. Before anything else, you need to simplify. Forget details. Look at your reference and ask, what is light, what is shadow? Group everything into big shapes and values. At this stage, your painting should look rough, almost ugly. But if the value structure works, the portrait will already start to feel real. Let's start with the foundation, proportions. Whatever method you use to transfer the person you are painting onto the canvas, the rules are the same. The placement of the key elements of the face is important for achieving likeness. Without proper spacing between the face elements, the person you are painting is gonna look nothing like the picture. I personally use the grid. I like to measure everything and make sure everything is spaced out correctly, because even a millimeter off to one side can completely destroy likeness in a portrait. So don't guess, measure. Once we know where everything is going to be, it's time to place those first brush strokes. Usually, with a portrait, I start with a monochromatic underpainting, and I explain the importance of this step in depth in this video, but for this demonstration, I've decided to skip this part. Your first brush strokes should build up the structure of the face by marking the shadows and highlights surrounding the elements of the face. Most beginners think detail creates realism, but it's actually light and shadow that defines the structure. You can mix perfect colors, but if your values are wrong, the whole face will look flat as a pancake. When your values are correct, you can get away with slight hue shifts and still achieve likeness in a portrait. Most painters don't pay attention to small but important detail, which is edge control. I know I didn't for a long time, but it's one of those things that separates technically correct paintings from ones that actually feel real. At the most basic level, an edge is just a transition between two shapes, light and shadow, one plane of the face turning to another, or the subject against the background. But what matters is how that transition happens. You're always dealing with the spectrum. Hard edges, soft edges, lost edges. In reality, nothing exists with a uniform edge quality. The human face, especially, is full of subtle shifts, from turning slowly in space, areas catching light differently, edges appearing and disappearing depending on light conditions. If you treat everything the same, the illusion breaks immediately. Hard edges happen when there is sudden place change or strong contrast. For example, the edge of a cast shadow, the eyelid cutting across the eyeball, or where light sharply separates from shadow. These edges pull attention. They feel precise, controlled, intentional. Soft edges happen when form turns gradually, like the cheek rolling into the shadow, or the transition along the forehead. These are critical for creating illusion of volume. Without them, the face starts to look cut out or pasted on. Lost edges are where things get interesting. This is where the edge between two shapes becomes so subtle that it almost disappears. For example, when the value of the skin matches the background, or when shadow melts into the shadow. These areas create atmosphere and depth. They also prevent the painting from feeling over-defined. One of the biggest issues in beginner work is the tendency to either outline everything or blend everything. Outlining creates graphic, artificial look. It flattens the form because it separates everything too clearly. Overblending does the opposite. It removes structure and makes everything feel muddy and unfocused. Good edge control is about variety and hierarchy. Not all edges should be equal. You are guiding the viewer's eye by deciding where to be sharp and where to let things dissolve. You should also pay attention to your brushwork. It's just as important as everything else. The thickness of the paint and the direction of the brushstrokes matter more than you think. Your brush marks reflect light, and you can take the advantage of it by painting perpendicularly to the source of the light, making certain areas appear brighter and more alive in the highlights. But be careful with that. You should avoid making thick brush strokes with texture in dark areas, because it's going to work against you and reflect light where it shouldn't, making your darks appear brighter than they should be. In conclusion, painting a face isn't a separate discipline. It follows the exact same rules as painting everything else, whether it's a landscape, a still life, or an animal. Everything breaks down into values, shapes, colors, and edges. Stop treating portrait painting like a different species. It's not. At its core, it's always doing the same things, transitioning a three-dimensional form onto a two-dimensional surface. The subject itself is irrelevant. What actually matters is how well you understand the fundamentals. That's what determines how clearly and convincingly you can describe your subject. So, I hope you found this video helpful. If you would like, you can leave a like or a comment. And if you would like to know when a new video is uploaded, consider becoming a subscriber. And I will see you in the next one.